Something shifts around 40. Not for everyone, not universally, but for many people, regardless of gender. There's a recalibration, a moment where the math changes, where what mattered before starts mattering less and what was deprioritized suddenly becomes urgent. And if you're a man in proximity to this shift, if you're watching someone go through it or experiencing its consequences, you need to understand what's actually happening, not to judge it, not to resent it, but to recognize it clearly so you can make informed decisions about whether you're participating in someone's genuine growth or being used as a solution to a problem you didn't create. Because this recalibration, this midlife reassessment, it creates specific patterns, and those patterns affect you, and understanding them is the difference between being a conscious participant and being collateral damage in someone else's reckoning with time. Here's the first pattern: urgency replacing selectivity. For 20 years, choice was abundant, options existed, time felt infinite, and decision-making could be leisurely, could prioritize perfect over good enough, could pass on solid options while waiting for ideal ones. But somewhere around 40, the calculation shifts. The biological clock isn't just ticking, it's alarming. And suddenly what was leisurely becomes urgent, what was selective becomes desperate. And men who were previously invisible, who were categorized as safe but boring, as stable but unsexy, as good on paper but lacking spark, suddenly become interesting. Not because they changed, but because the metrics changed. What's being optimized for shifted. And if you're one of those men, if you're suddenly receiving interest from someone who wouldn't have looked at you 10 years ago, you need to ask yourself, am I being chosen or am I being settled for? Am I desired or am I being selected because time is running out and I check necessary boxes? And that's not bitterness, that's clarity. Because building a relationship with someone who's choosing you from urgency rather than genuine attraction, that creates a foundation that's unstable from the beginning. The second pattern is the reopening of old options. She's reaching out to men from her past, not all of them, but specific ones, the ones who wanted more than she was willing to give, the ones who were interested but got friend-zoned, the ones who offered stability she didn't want when she wanted excitement. And now she's back, testing whether those doors are still open, whether those men are still available, whether what they offered 10 years ago is still on the table. And if you're one of those men, if you're being contacted after years of silence, you need to recognize what this is. It's not that she suddenly realized your value, it's that her priorities changed and you now align with them. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you're fine being chosen at 40 for qualities that didn't matter at 30. But you should at least be conscious of it, should at least acknowledge that you're not her first choice becoming available. You're her last choice before she accepts singleness. And that distinction matters, not for ego, for understanding what you're building and whether the foundation is solid. The third pattern is the desire for traditional relationship structure after rejecting it for decades. She spent her 20s and 30s prioritizing career, independence, personal freedom, exploring options, refusing to be tied down. And those choices were valid. Those priorities made sense for that phase. But now there's a shift. Suddenly, traditional relationship markers matter: commitment, marriage, children if the window hasn't closed, building a home, creating stability. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But when someone spent 20 years rejecting traditional structure and then suddenly wants it urgently, you need to understand the motivation. Is this genuine evolution? Or is this panic? Is she wanting partnership because she actually values partnership? Or because being single at 45 feels different than being single at 25? Because that difference, that distinction between wanting something because you've grown into valuing it versus wanting it, because the alternative has become uncomfortable, that distinction predicts how she'll engage with it, whether she'll honor it, whether she'll actually do the work of partnership, or whether she'll resent it while being in it. Here's the fourth pattern: increased pragmatism masquerading as maturity. She's talking about compatibility now, about shared values, about practical considerations, about building something sustainable. And she frames this as growth, as finally understanding what matters, as being mature enough to prioritize substance over chemistry. but pay attention to what's actually happening. Is she genuinely valuing these things? Or is she devaluing chemistry because chemistry didn't lead anywhere? Is she actually prioritizing compatibility? Or is she accepting compatibility as consolation prize because what she actually wanted wasn't available? Because there's a difference between someone who's grown to value practical partnership and someone who's resigned themselves to it because passionate partnership didn't materialize, and that difference shows up in how they engage, in whether they're grateful for what they have or subtly resentful that it's not what they wanted, in whether they choose you with enthusiasm or accept you with pragmatism. The fifth pattern is the testing of marketplace value. She's suddenly more active on dating apps, more present socially, more available, and she's seeing what's possible, what level of man is interested, whether she can still attract the quality she wants. And this phase is brutal to watch if you're already involved with her, because it reveals uncertainty, reveals that she's not sure you're the best she can do, that she's checking whether upgrading is possible before she commits fully. And if you're in this position, if you're with someone who's clearly assessing options while being with you, you have information. You're not her choice, you're her backup while she determines if better is available, and maybe she doesn't find better. Maybe she returns to you more committed, but you'll always know. You'll always know you weren't chosen. You were settled for after the market told her she couldn't do better. Here's the sixth pattern, the wanting of stability without wanting of the person providing it. She needs someone solid, someone reliable, someone who can provide emotional and financial security, and you are those things. But she doesn't want you. She wants what you represent. And that distinction shows up everywhere. In lack of physical enthusiasm, in duty-based intimacy, in gratitude for what you provide but absence of desire for who you are. And this is perhaps the most painful position to be in, to be valued for your function but not desired for your personhood. To know you're appreciated as solution but not wanted as human, to feel like you're being used even though there's no overt deception. Because she's honest about appreciating you. She's just not honest about whether appreciation is the same as attraction, whether gratitude is the same as desire, whether being valued for utility is the same as being chosen for yourself. Here's what these patterns reveal. When someone's operating from urgency rather than genuine desire, when they're making decisions based on time pressure rather than authentic preference, it creates relationships that are structurally unsound. Not because the person is bad, not because they're intentionally manipulative, but because the foundation is wrong. The foundation is fear. Fear of being alone, fear of time running out, fear of missing last chances, and fear is a terrible foundation for relationship, because what's built on fear requires constant management, requires the feared outcome to stay threatening, and if circumstances change, if the fear diminishes, the entire structure becomes questionable. Why am I in this if I'm not afraid anymore? And that question, once it surfaces, it destroys whatever was built. Because it reveals the relationship wasn't about mutual choosing. It was about solving a problem. And once the problem is solved, or the solution is no longer needed, what's left? So what do you do if you recognize these patterns? If you realize you're being chosen from urgency rather than desire? First, you acknowledge it. You stop pretending the interest is the same as it would have been 10 years ago. You recognize that you're being selected based on different criteria, that what's making you attractive now is different from what would have made you attractive then, and you decide whether that's acceptable, whether being chosen for practical reasons rather than passionate ones is something you can build with. And there's no universal answer. For some men, being valued for stability is enough. Being appreciated for what they provide is sufficient, but for others it's not. For others, being settled for feels like death. Feels like spending life with someone who's constantly measuring you against what they actually wanted and finding you adequate but not exciting. Second, you protect yourself. You don't invest deeply without reciprocity. You don't build without mutual enthusiasm. You don't commit to someone who's treating you as best available option rather than genuine choice. You watch whether her actions match her words, whether the appreciation comes with desire, whether the gratitude comes with attraction, whether she's choosing you or accepting you. And you make decisions based on what you observe rather than what you're told. Third, you maintain your standards. You don't become so grateful for attention that you accept relationships that don't meet your needs. You don't lower your requirements just because someone who wouldn't have wanted you before wants you now. You still deserve genuine desire, mutual enthusiasm, a partner who's excited about you, not resigned to you. And if that's not what's being offered, if what's being offered is companionship built on pragmatism rather than passion, you have the right to decline. You have the right to say this isn't enough, even if she thinks it should be. Even if she's offering everything she's capable of offering, you still get to want more, to need more, to require that you're chosen for yourself rather than selected for your utility. And fourth, you stay conscious. You watch the patterns. You notice whether the urgency that brought her to you creates gratitude or resentment, whether she's happy with what she found or constantly wondering about what she missed, whether she's present with you or perpetually looking back at paths not taken. Because midlife recalibration doesn't just affect the moment. It affects everything that follows. And if someone entered relationship from fear rather than desire, that fear doesn't disappear. It just shifts form, becomes resentment, becomes the sense that she settled, becomes the midlife crisis at 50, where she questions everything because she never fully chose it. She just accepted it because time was running out. And you don't want to build a life with someone whose foundation is acceptance rather than choice, whose commitment is based on lack of alternatives rather than presence of genuine desire. Who's with you because being alone felt worse, not because being with you felt right. Here's the truth that's hard to accept. Not all interest is equal. Being wanted at 40 because priorities shifted is different from being wanted at 30 because attraction was genuine. And pretending those are the same, pretending that late interest is just as valuable as early interest, it sets you up for relationships that never quite feel mutual, that always have underlying tension, that always carry the unspoken question of what she would have done if circumstances were different. And you can't build stable intimacy on those foundations. You can build functional partnerships, practical arrangements, companionships that work on paper. But genuine intimacy, the kind where both people feel fully chosen, fully desired, fully wanted for who they are, rather than what they provide, that requires different foundations. Requires that you were chosen from genuine preference rather than from urgency, from authentic desire rather than from fear of alternatives. And if you're not getting that, if what you're getting is practical selection based on midlife recalibration, you need to decide whether that's enough. Whether you can live with being the person she chose because time was running out. Whether that's the story you want for your relationship. And there's no wrong answer, just your answer, based on what you need, what you deserve, and whether what's being offered actually meets that. And if it doesn't, if it's just adequate but not enough, you have the right to walk away, to wait for someone whose interest isn't based on urgency, whose choice of you isn't their last option before accepting singleness, whose desire for you exists independent of their fear of being alone, because that person exists. And settling for urgency-based interest just because someone finally sees your value, that's not a win. That's just another form of not being chosen, and you deserve better than that. You always did.